and critical thinking and Deleuze in ecology. Thank you.
Thank you. Everybody settle, everybody back from their break. So a couple coming back. I hate it when you start something and then people walk in. And can you all hear me at the back? Is the microphone on? Yeah. I'll speak more loudly when I get into the talk. Don't worry. Okay. Looking for something? All right, first I'd like to thank the organizers of the conference for inviting me here. I was in touch with Dr. Ravi and Dr. Manoj by internet and by email, so must admit it's a great pleasure to be here. First time for me in India. Whenever I go to a different place, I like to try and connect in my talk with what's happening locally, what the traditions are. I think following on from what Anne and Dan and Ken and other people have said, it's not about us coming here and telling you the truth of Deleuze or giving you one reading. Obviously, your readings, your cultural traditions, where you're up to and understanding all this is vital in any discussion or communication happening between us. So hopefully we can make that connection today, and we can come out the other side feeling a whole lot better. So before I start, one thing I did, there is, on the program, I made a mistake. It's my fault. I thought that these camp sessions were for a little bit like the translation, for deep readings of Deleuze. So I thought we were going to sort of, in small groups, read, I thought, Image of Thought and the Geophilosophy chapters. But that's okay. What I've done is we're going to do my plenary talk now, which was far longer than 20 minutes anyway, so it never would not possibly have fitted into that 20-minute slot. So that's really good. It just means that the two deep reading sessions, which would have given you some background and understanding into the ideas that I'm applying in this paper, it's kind of reverse. It's the other. It's okay. It doesn't matter. Just twisted it around a bit. Okay. So I've written an original paper. First time I've ever delivered this speech and paper. It's not been published, so it's fresh off my mind, however you would express it. And I called it Learning to Think in the Anthropocene. One thing, I kind of suddenly had a panic in the hotel last night when I was awake. Do you know what the Anthropocene is? Have you heard of the Anthropocene? This was coined, well, it actually goes back to the 80s. It was first used, but it was really made famous by an environmental scientist, Paul Crutzen, who wrote a paper in Nature and mentioned the Anthropocene. Basically, he was saying that because of human activity on the planet, and specifically the release of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, we have caused, we are causing, and we will continue to cause irreversible climate damage and change. So it's a product of us. And I just thought, since I've really been thinking about this Anthropocene for the last couple of years, and I just really, something about the whole notion of it really fitted in with when, as Anne said, when you read the genealogy of morals, if you the geology of morals, you can see the kind of resonance, the connections there between this idea of the Anthropocene, a man-made geological strata, and what Deleuze Guattari say in Thousand Plateaus, and sort of incidentally, I suppose, in What is Philosophy. My name, by the way, David R. Cole, and here I've started a website. If you want to just write that URL down, I don't know, we won't have time probably to look at it now. Maybe we could go back to it at the end if anybody's got any questions about the website. But I like the idea of not just being an academic who writes papers and books and things like that, but actually sort of hopes to get involved with collective activist type action. And this, climate change thing is a huge area that I'd like to know what's happening in India or wherever you're involved with any sorts of climate change or environmental issues. So, write to me or have a look at the website and get in touch and get involved, and that would be terrific. As a consequence of this talk, if we could, something could happen. Okay? So going to this paper. Is that all okay? Is that clear? Yes! Yes, David! Good, you're there. So it's about the Anthropocene. I'm using Deleuze Guattari's ideas. I know this could call it Guattari Deleuze, or I start off really in more Deleuzian mode, kind of as a thinking project, but then I fit more into the ecological influence from Guattari and Thousand Plateaus and Gregory Bates and all that sort of later on in the paper. What I like to do is apply it to real things that happen in the world. In Thousand Plateaus, go to the first quote. Thousand Plateaus, you'll notice when you read Thousand Plateaus, they're all dated. They all have a date. They're in history. It's not an idealistic, universal, out-of-time, theoretical framework. It's really in time. Like this date now, we could construct a plateau around it. But in this paper, I went to something I remember from my murky mind, my memory, specific date, 13th of June, 1992. And George H.W. Bush, do you remember him? Those of you old enough to been around when he was about. He flew into one of the biggest I think the biggest environmental conference that had been ever organized at the time in Rio de Janeiro, called the Earth Summit. And this is one of the things he said, one of the claims he made. I think we are, and I think the record shows we are, the leading environmental nation in the world. So what I'm doing with this paper is, it's very easy just to say no. It's just kind of rhetoric. It's just lies. It's just a kind of large yes. It's just a politician spinning around. But what George Bush was saying, are a deeply held set of beliefs. It's a specific moment in time, and there are specific consequences to that moment in time, which now we're dealing with 30 years later and into the future. So what I think Deleuze Guattari give you, Deleuze to start with his thinking, his image of thought thinking, and then Guattari with his ecology, they give you a way into these complexes, these plateaus, i.e. what George Bush said and what was happening at the time, and how to understand them in a complex, as Anne beautifully said in her speech, in a complex, non-reactive way. So hopefully, we can, as a collective, as a sensible human population, do something about it and not let this idiocy continue. That's my hope and my dream, So this talk and my talks on the Anthropocene and my website and all my work around this area, that is kind of what I'm, my application of Deleuze Guattari, that's kind of the point of it. Okay? So you with me so far? Yes? Just nod if you agree. Yes, David? Okay, good. So we're in 1992, George H.W. Bush, and also the city of Dallas I've chosen as a sort of case study, as an empirical example of, because when I was there last year, and it's ringed by this huge highway called the George H.W. Bush Highway. So he's kind of left his imprint in this place. And the very lifestyle, we'll get to that, but you can do empirical work with the Deleuze Guattari framework. So this is what I'm trying, it's not, highly scientific in many ways, but I think, theoretically, intellectually, should be very interesting. So these are the kind of what I'm trying to do in this paper. So again, because I didn't do the session, we're not looking at the image of thought chapter from Difference to Repetition. Over many years now, I've come up with this, I call it critical thinking practice. So it's not just critique, it's not just critical thinking, it's embedded in practice. It's got all those affective, immanent aspects to it. and which means we can keep thinking and getting at assumptions, hopefully in a profound way. And then there's this very interesting connection, indifference and repetition, from thinking to learning. So, as you know, this type of thinking that we're getting from Deleuze should enable learning. And that has to be aligned with nature and the unconscious. And Deleuze, he names nature, names the unconscious, and but it's not this kind of romantic dream of nature or this, necessarily surreal unconscious we're talking about. It's actually the aspects that keep us learning, drive us in these critical thinking practices, for example, about the Anthropocene, which we're looking at here. So the specific combination of Deleuzean thinking and learning can enable a new approach. This is my hope, my dream, approach to the Anthropocene, which this article will elaborate. So I'm looking at time, the economy, and growth. These are the three key areas that we look at in this paper. All right, so I have written a paper. I'll try and explain it and not just read all of it because it's more engaging. But I haven't got all this in my head. I haven't memorized it, so I will need to read parts of it. Okay. So I'm arguing that Deleuze's philosophical journey through the history through Western philosophy and attending to issues in art, literature, cinema enables a nomadic position through and in which the subject of philosophizing and thinking can be questioned and this new image of thought can be produced. It's in his dual work with Felix Guattari that this intellectual process is extended and broadened to attend to the dynamics of capitalism and schizophrenia. And an image of thought can be produced that is not subject to the domination of the Western philosophical tradition or to capitalism or to this broader thought project in Thousand Plateaus and Anti-Oedipus. I would argue this is a type of materialism, a type of immanent materialism that mobilizes material ideas on planes of immanence to construct conceptual ecologies around particular inquiries, here figured through the Anthropocene. In the Thousand Plateaus, Deleuze-Guattari drew on the ideas of Gregory Bateson, who suggests that all that we can call thought is the result of exchanges in information. It's an intellectual, affective activity and physical interaction, and which includes the exchanges of non-humans as ecology. Thus, fully mobilized, the image of thought from A Thousand Plateaus can lead to a mode of becoming or action in and through which thinking and learning are fused. Directionality in learning is not tied to human-only designated outcomes or pre-designated quantitative goals, but attends to an immanent plane, here figured through the date June the 13th, 1992, when George Bush parachuted into the first Rio Earth Summit and proclaimed that the United States was the preeminent environmental nation in the world. I claim that this is a watershed moment in world history, in and through which a new mode of global American exceptionalism was in the process of being born. The USSR and the spread of world communism had in their eyes been defeated. The USA was triumphant and going progressively more global, imperial, commercial, invasive. And George H.W. Bush, full of hubris and largesse, claimed that all ecological problems in the world could be solved through the economic model of the United States, which would guarantee surpluses to invest in environmental scientific solutions to any world problem. I argue in this paper that exactly the opposite is true. In 1992, George H.W. Bush declared that the American way of life is non-negotiable. And I would claim that this is precisely the problem, which should be addressed here through this Deleuzean critical thinking practice and Deleuze-Guattari ecological inquiry. Bush intended to take over and direct the Earth Summit through American power and influence, and therefore ride roughshod over specific ecological crises that the American way of life has created, is created, and will create in the future, as other nations try and emulate the American way of life. The truth is that in 1992, the boundary line of the Anthropocene had already been crossed. Enough CO2 had been released into the atmosphere to cause irreversible climate change. Bush was in fact both defending and creating a mythology of globalization, through and by which the human, or figured as he said it, the American way of life, would save the world, which in fact it was precisely destroying. Before and ever since, and through and in fossil fuel capital. I use the term fossil fuel capitalism quite a lot in this paper. That comes from Andreas Malm, who's a Swedish theorist. So the first aspect of this self-reciprocation and death loop that I'll attend to in this paper is time. Okay? So here you can see I'm applying the Deleuzean metaphysics to this Anthropocene, first of all in terms of time. So the third plateau in 1,000 Plateaus, dated 10,000 BC. This date marks the beginning of the Holocene, changing the environmental and global conditions that enabled the rise of human civilization since that date. One could argue that human drives that were apparent at the beginning of the Holocene created the Anthropocene and have continued to flourish and entwine were already constituted upon at least 4 dimensions that go back in time much further to the hominids that preceded Homo sapiens and represent perhaps 2.5 million years of evolution. Last year I gave a talk at the New School in New York when I spelled all this out very clearly, hopefully. So the first is tool enhancement, the second the carbon trail, third is the Phalocene, and the fourth atomic time. Tool enhancement and the carbon trail were already part of the human constitution at the beginning of the Holocene. The Phalocene and atomic time were to follow, as sedentary society was invented in different parts of the world, and human civilizations developed that dominated domestic populations through strata, other human populations and their environments in terms of invasion and colonialization. So the first lesson that we derive from this Deleuze-Guattari analysis of the Anthropocene is that there are multiple times running through the present situation. And the plateau of June 13th, 1992, when George H.W. Bush claimed the American way of life was unassailable, are subject to a manifold, or multiplicity, which Deleuze derives from Riemann, but which he ascribes a philosophical status, replacing the metaphysical notion of substance from Aristotle in this Deleuzean new metaphysical architecture. However, the danger in the I would say brash application of Deleuze at this point to the present time, and saying that time is simply multiple, is that it gets rid of agency. We can't do anything about these problems. Therefore, the Deleuzean concept of time includes the element of synthesis, through and by which the modalities of time are produced out of the synthesis of particular elements. In this part of the paper, I relied a lot on James Williams' brilliant book on time in Deleuze. So Williams says, out of chaos, related particulars, paths are selected. In effect, since 10,000 BC and the start of the Holocene, the specific paths have been chosen by human society, which have resulted in the present-day globalized situation, and which passed a rupture point or expression point in June 13th, 1992, and the Anthropocene, precisely as Bush was addressing the Earth Summit. Bush is suggesting that humanity should continue along this multiple entwined paths that produced the American way of life up until and after that point. I suggest that we can question this complex entangled path using this Deleuze-Guattari intellectual approach through thinking and learning. We can't reverse the Anthropocene, but we can in particular try and understand and unravel the production of the Anthropocene in the American way of life and in terms of synthesis. So the first synthesis up there, this is the metaphysical architecture that we have from Deleuze, is the concept of time, of habit, sorry. So the first synthesis from Deleuze and the concept of time is habit. Habits are often passive, unconscious, yet according to this schema for learning and thought, in terms of environmental action, we can attend to them, we can recalibrate. Of course, it's hard to change one's habits, as they are often embroiled within structures that we just can't alter. For example, and this is where I start bringing in the case study when I was in Dallas last year for 5 weeks working with academics out there. So, for example, in this, in the metropolis of Dallas, as exemplifying this American way of life that Bush was talking about, one is obliged to habitually take one's car for even the smallest of tasks, to go shopping, to go to college, to go to work. To get out of one's house, you need a car. Public transport is limited, electric cars are unaffordable, making one's daily habits part of the problematic of climate change. So they're all adding to this CO2 release. Even if, this is where techno-social solutions could come in, electric cars are to become cheaper. Electricity in Dallas is still largely produced from coal, natural gas, which all accumulatively adds to the problem of climate change. So Deleuzean first synthesis of time as habit doesn't change these facts, but it does include them as an extension of thought and a possible recalibration or active synthesis. So that's the first synthesis. Second synthesis, memory. So Deleuze principally derived the notion of synthesis of time through memory from Bergson, from Proust, similar to habit, as an expanded, specific, literary, philosophical concept of memory, and represents harnessing a memory away from a personalized, interior, subjective memory that focuses only on one's life story, which of course is still important for everybody. For example, now it gets back to Dallas. My memories of staying in Dallas represent my time here, my time there, and what happened to me, but they're also, in this talk, making a connection with the Anthropocene. This connection is complex, interlaced, emotional, and suggestive of how the cityscape of Dallas contributes to the current state of climate change in the Anthropocene. The city is spread out, excruciatingly hot in the summer, with arterial highways and vast road systems, often congested with traffic, which join nodes of featureless shopping precincts, endless housing estates, and places such as vast university zones where I briefly worked. So, these enormous universities, which are very hard to navigate. Dallas is a non-place from Auger's non-place, a globalized erasure on the original American plane, and productive of exactly the American way of life which George H. Bush says will fix environmental calamities, which we're all now in. Okay? Third synthesis from Deleuze is the new. This is the most complex synthesis of time and is entirely different from merely coming up with new ideas, as suggested, for example, in blue sky thinking. One way to think of the three syntheses is as present, past, and future, even though these dimensions of and in the three syntheses do intermingle, perhaps most obviously in the production of the new. In terms of our example, Dallas, as exemplary of the American way of life, the Anthropocene, one could imagine a better, greener city with electric cars, solar, wind power, better public transport, and a new way of life not dependent on fossil fuel capitalism. However, it's clear that this set of new thoughts about Dallas will not be realized without enormous political will, collective action that could change the present status quo, and with an entirely new economic model that guides the Dallas lifestyle away from carbon dioxide release. So the point from Deleuze is that the three passive syntheses are only become active once joined in real political social ends, and, for example, thought experiments such as Nietzsche's eternal return in The Gay Science. As such, change becomes possible as intensity. Difference in itself is not merely a rewriting of Kant's noumena, but a means to challenge the settled image of thought as stasis, assumption, equilibrium, and as constituting the inability to act. Deleuze's metaphysics of time is a non-metrical manifold of coexisting syntheses. That's a direct quote from Williams. It's a methodology that combines empirical observation, transcendental deduction, and within a broad speculative framework. In this article, this metaphysics of time from Deleuze acts to transplant the takeover of subjectivity by fossil fuel capitalism and all the values and beliefs that go with that, being upheld by President Bush and augmented pretty much as well. So we want to recast those on different lines. And quote here, this is from a Finnish philosopher, von Wright, which I think goes well with this new metaphysical architecture of time from Deleuze. He's saying that the aim is to comprehend a new order of being and becoming that one seeks and is realized by recognizing signposts, guiding stars, in order to reorganize one's life in a sound way and to adjust societal relations accordingly. The purpose of this intellectual quest is to attain wisdom rather than knowledge. To live according to this reached understanding is when being and becoming are aligned with the preconditions of nature. So, when you put quotes in like that and saying, oh, these are kind of connected to Deleuzean way of thinking, they're not exactly the same. I would question certain aspects of that, but I think there's a sort of, a parallel mission there, which helps us to understand the Deleuzean approach. All right, how's it going? Still in there? Haven't fallen asleep? You following? Yes, David? Yes! Good. All right, now this is the heavy bit. That was the easy bit. This is the hard bit. The economy. Oh, that's Dallas. I got a researcher from Dallas sending me photos of life in Dallas, so you just got a bit of a life from the highway in your car all day driving around with these shiny buildings. Nobody knows what happens in these buildings. I think they're just there for show. All right, so now I come up with loads of tables in this paper. I got into my tables, but we'll get to that. The next bit is the economy. This is the hard bit, isn't it? Because it's, who doesn't want the economy to improve? Do you know what I mean? It's a hard question to deal with, the economy. So, economy and the Anthropocene. So Deleuze and Guattari do not give us a fully sketched out economic model for sustainability or indeed survival in the Anthropocene. Rather, what we can do is use their philosophy to reanalyze today's economic model and, in the context of this article, apply it to Bush's statements in 1992 and to Dallas. Okay, firstly, economics, figured as a purely human activity based on the exchange of a monetary form, may be questioned as being multiple and not solely human. Deleuze Guattari's work is concerned with introducing new elements, non-human, natural, unconscious, into any one stream of thought, such as economics. And as such, they affect a kind of connective yet fragmenting synthesis that Guattari defined as ecosophy, ecological philosophy, ecosophy. So ecosophy is a philosophical worldview or system inspired by our living conditions in the ecosphere. In Anti-Oedipus, Deleuze Guattari give us a relatively, everything in Deleuze Guattari is complicated and complexified, but in terms of expressing ourselves, clearly understanding this question about the economy, Anti-Oedipus gives this relatively simple account of the rise of capitalism, developed from the notion of synthesis and which backgrounds and deepens the idea of ecosophy. So in the first case, a connective synthesis works to join bodies and communities, creates phylation, as can be seen in pre-modern communities. So I live in Australia, such as happened with the Indigenous Australians. In this state of connective synthesis, one feels closer, part of nature and community, because of the unbroken connectedness in thought and relative freedom of the underdeveloped ego and superego, and not to become lodged in simple, repetitive, possessive, or sedentary thought patterns. So obviously, I speak in Australian with experts in Indigenous communities now in Australia have fully, come into capitalism and they're taking part in everything that happens in a modern society as well. It's just an example to show this connective synthesis. So the next stage, this is reading Anti-Oedipus, characterized by disjunctive synthesis or top-down power structures such as the state, patriarchy, feudalism, worship of a king, or a transcendental god. Power is no longer distributed immanently in the nomadic acts of becoming, but dispensed through royal favor, top-down mechanisms, codes, edicts, decrees that discipline and organize a predominantly slave population. The third stage, capitalism introduces conjunctive syntheses, which are about producing surplus value through and by joining decoded flows, for example, by uniting commodities, finished products with their markets through sale. It's through this very act of conjunction that capitalism is able to absorb previous societies, values, ways of life, and, for example, as George H.W. Bush, getting back to good old George, was able to claim, a growing economy creates the resources necessary for environmental protection, and environmental protection makes growth sustainable over the long term. I've added the emphasis there. So this thesis, how are we going for time? Oh, it's pretty good. This thesis, according to George Bush, could be kind of seen to be lived out in a place like Dallas. Dallas is currently booming. It's got a growing economy. Population is growing. It's attracting numerous immigrants. And the city is expanding endlessly across the featureless Texan plain. Large populations of migrants are being attracted to Dallas by this economic success once they've done all the visa work and they've got round Donald Trump and things like that. And in general, these immigrants are able to, talking very generally here, but I don't have personal knowledge of everybody's stories, but they're able to establish a good standard of life in a place like Dallas. There's good education, abundant universities, there are new businesses springing up, there's employment, housing, infrastructure, there's huge supermarkets, shopping centers, all these great Anthropocene, benefits. And migrants can enjoy these benefits while connecting with other migrants who speak their own language and practice their culture and religion in this new place. Of course, this success is part of the boom cycle of capitalism and shows how questions of the environment are submerged and denied under conditions of continued economic success. And the lifestyle assumptions that go along with economic success, like buying nice things, distractions, pleasurable holidays, this lifetime, balance that one aspires to, they all deny even the existence of the environment. Under these conditions, one might think, well, there's a great, we're funding through our taxes a team of great scientists who are working assiduously on a solution to the Anthropocene, to climate change, so we can just get on, we can just carry on living our lives, we don't have to bother. And these scientists are probably out of sight in one of these huge universities we don't understand, being funded by the booming economy. However, the truth is that the central problem of the Anthropocene, defined as climate change caused by anthropocentric activity, is not wholly scientific. It's a wicked or embittered problem. There's quite a lot of literature around this, actually. And the very acts of living, coming to a place like Dallas, are creating the problem. Unknowingly, unconsciously, the problem is getting worse and worse. So George H.W. Bush's solution to environmental problems, i.e. enhanced economics, is accelerating CO2 release. And it's by speeding things up, by speeding up exchange, drawing more people in. And what is required to get closer to understanding this wicked problem of climate change caused by anthropocentric activity is a rebellion against the mechanics of economics and a rethinking of all the connectors to the solutions to climate change, such as living a zero carbon emissions lifestyle. Science needs to be connected to social science, the humanities, to rethink nature and the unconscious, as Deleuze suggests, as part of this wicked problem of human-made climate change and a questioning of the conjunctive syntheses in and of capitalism. As a result, the very logic of our thinking needs to turn away from the primary thought and expression in economics, as is expressed, for example, by, here's another picture from Dallas. That's the George, I think one of those is the George Bush Highway, by Bung in 1998. So he says the economic approach to everything social homogenizes, flattens social science by reducing all social relations to exchanges and all goods and bads to commodities without regard to the specific functions. The approach does not and cannot work for families or clubs, schools or hospitals, scientific laboratories or artists' ateliers, churches or charities, political parties or government departments, police stations or courtrooms. So kind of nothing social really works if you just subsume all thought under economics. The ecosophy that one may take from Deleuze, Guattari, and particularly Guattari's solo work, does not prioritize economics as the primary mode of activity, nor does it reduce all other activity to it, or enact the capture of life, action, and power to exchange value as in and happens under fossil fuel capitalism. In the Anti-Oedipus, there is a teleological sense that capitalism will someday come to an end, once it has sufficiently ravaged the earth and all its resources are depleted, ending the deterritorializing effects of capitalism, as the territory of nature will have been effectively remade as human capital commodity machine. One of the key drivers of this process, according to Deleuze, Guattari, is money. And a lot of interesting articles actually about Deleuze, Guattari's take on money, which aligns itself with subjective desires, desiring machines to enact the affective and personal effects of and in capitalism, and in so doing becomes the only, this is a quote from Anti-Oedipus, the only social machine that is constructed on the basis of decoded flows, substituting for intrinsic codes an axiomatic of abstract quantities in the form of money. Of course, there are different types of money. We don't want to just homogenize money. Heaven forbid. And these differentials in capital, finance, cash, credit, debt, set up and maintain a complex set of axioms, values, understood perhaps only by central bankers, and become apparent when the system, only become really truly apparent when the system collapses before recalibrating, as happened in 2008 with the GFC. These differentials in money are also one of the reasons that the system works so well. It is in its very fluidity that makes it possible to overcome its own limits and enact a mode of immanence as described by Marx. In terms of the subject of this paper and learning to think in the Anthropocene, the question of money concerns whether or not we're able to think beyond money and this quantifying system that upholds its existence and present-day stranglehold on and in value. If we are to move to a genuinely ecological mode of living, these considerations are paramount to changing the course of present-day civilization. In 1,000 Plateaus, the teleological implications that capitalism will accelerate the flows of money so that they will destroy its own base for functioning is questioned. And a non-linear history is described in and through which certain dates in history are reconstructed through these planes of immanence, which I'm doing here in terms of June the 13th, 1992. And the immanence of capital, you can see it in George Bush and his pronouncements. He made his grand entrance. It wasn't just what he said, it's the way he arrived. He arrived in these helicopters, full television coverage. He was the conference, according to him. So everything he said, his whole body language was meant for the domestic American and international TV audience. It's all for television. As for the delegates, there were great delegates in that hall, real experts in climate change and ecology. He didn't care about those people. But they may well have been, what he did do with his largesse and his triumph, and he gave out money to environmental groups in the hall. So they were there listening to his every word, just in case he might include them, to get money out of him. So Bush did not enter into any discussion or debate about his statements or his values. Even though his statements about environmental protection are dependent on economics is patently false, it stirs up the deep-seated ways in which our beliefs are now mixed up with money and capitalism. The approach from Deleuze, Guattari enables this questioning mode not only on the veracity of George H.W. Bush's statements, but also an investigation as to how we can relate them to a global social body. This is not an investigation solely from the outside, but enables the complicated ways in which we are actually part of the problem. We are all in the economy, and this describes the everyday sense that we add to climate change in the Anthropocene, even at the levels of desire and the imagination. Consequently, the future of capitalism and its possible demise is not as important as the ways in which it continues to adapt, recalibrate, and reveal the imminent levels of its functioning, such as the mantra and necessity of growth. And this is the next section. This is where I start doing my little tables. Growth. So the through line, if you look at this table, through lines in this paper, the syntheses from Deleuze, Guattari in the Anthropocene are creating these couplets: habit, connectivity, connective, memory, disjunctive, the new, the conjunctive. In turn, these syntheses produce an entwined mode of growth, table 1, which has become central consideration of all economic forecasting, whether positive or negative. Growth in the economic sense refers to the places and businesses where profits can and will be made and lost. For example, in locations such as Dallas, with its increasing population, favorable economic conditions, good infrastructure, strong governance that doesn't, tax anybody too much, all pointing to the probability of economic growth. The point in analysis from Deleuze-Guattari is that it is not primarily economic, it is multiple. It does not fall prey to the tendency and oscillation to revert back to natural growth as deep ecology may tend to, or to an entirely controlled economy, such as in a socialist state, which takes out any non-human or non-rational elements of growth. One could argue that the interrelated picture of growth from Deleuze-Guattari more closely follows the ways in which synthesis connects time, the economy, and growth, and avoids overgeneralization and romanticism of pure nature or imposed notions embedded in the ideology of human-only understanding with respect to how growth works. So I'll try to represent that in this table. First table is going to be another table coming up. So in Dallas, economic growth is palpable. Highways full of cars, general buzz in terms of movement of people, construction, new businesses, etc., etc. This is exactly the type of economics and growth that George H.W. Bush was talking about and underpins the mechanics of fossil fuel capitalism. So according to these syntheses from Deleuze-Guattari, the two types of growth relating to memory and the new are being satisfied. Deleuze is growing, the new is being produced. One's memory can recall how Dallas used to be and how it is now, how much it's growing. However, it's in the connective synthesis of habit demonstrates the other side of growth, which is not factored into economic equations from neoliberal and business-minded planners, who have set the city of Dallas to grow in the way that it is currently doing. People drive large distances in their cars every day, even to visit friends, go to leisure time activities. The whole city is spreading out without any planning across this enormous Texan plain. In the summer, searing hot temperatures, dry conditions, lack of water. Nature is extinguished within the metropolitan area of Dallas. When it does rain in sudden violent downpours due to storms, the water has nowhere to go and is trapped on the surface of roads and in parks, as there is no natural swampland left. Similarly, forests are replaced by planted trees on wide boulevards, spaced out at regular intervals, where I mentioned this, when I go to a place, I like to walk around and see if I can find some nature. And the only the animals I could find were these squirrels. There were these urban squirrels. The urban squirrels in Dallas are constantly of danger of becoming roadkill or being hunted by domestic cats. There's no wildness in Dallas. So the mythology of human exceptionalism is free to increase, uncontested, without hindrance from any other species. Maybe mosquitoes probably might get in there. So in Deleuze-Guattari, analysis of growth allows for these other sides of human exceptionalism to be attended to, in that there is a growth of ecological and environmental destruction simultaneous with the growth of modern human habitation based on fossil fuel capitalism, as seen, for example, in Dallas. This growth is hidden, imminent, lateral. Table 1. Is the dark, negative side of the spread of nodal cities such as Dallas, which are adding to the reality of man-made climate change without respite through everyday activity. So this analysis of growth in Deleuze-Guattari, there's a view. This is what it's like being in your car in Dallas. Again, this is George Bush, reminiscing. 20 years ago, some spoke of the limits to growth. Today we realize, bringing in the we, him and all his friends, all his rich friends living off oil profits, realize that growth is the engine of change and a friend of the environment. Today, an unprecedented era of peace, freedom, stability makes concerted action on the environment possible as never before. This was 1992. So George Bush was referring to, his personal crushing of communism and the saving the world from socialism, and the thriving, unfettered global capitalism, which he was rubbing his hands to make profits from. So this flourishing economy, this place such as Dallas, as a shining light, according to Bush, of environmental protection, should be the place we go as an example of how to deal with the Anthropocene. Of course it's not. Using the Deleuze-Guattari thinking analysis, one can understand why. Growth may be maximized in terms of how money flows, and with respect to capital investment, the availability of credit, production of jobs, subjectivity involved with entrepreneurship, finance. But according to Deleuze-Guattari perspective, growth is always multiple. It has concurrent dimensions, including the one which we come into contact with and live with through nature in our everyday lives, and the dimension of our unconscious imaginations through which we may refigure an ecological and richer life in contact and with nature. These dimensions are not attended to by George Bush, who foresaw infinite growth as an expression of an infinite quantitative economy, not dependent on finite, complex, embedded natures, or slowed down by any unwanted environmental or collective legislation to hinder or alter economic growth based on fossil fuel consumption. In this way, Deleuze-Guattari do not directly or simply oppose economic growth and the dividends and increase in general activity that it can provide, but in a parallel way to Marx and Engels' Communist Manifesto that praises the achievements and monuments of capitalism before theorizing how they may be replaced through communism, Deleuze-Guattari do not simply underwrite the current situation with a better utopic society based on non-capitalistic ecological principles. Rather, their thinking practice is a guide to understanding how and where the ruptures, lines of flight, modes of tension exist in the current situation. In the Anti-Oedipus, they are suggesting that capitalism, will end through this ravaging the earth, this deterritorialization, and this provides tipping points through which a new society may be reimagined and enacted. However, it is clear that this point in history has not yet been reached. Fossil fuel capitalism is resilient, as capitalism is able to mutate, change, and use other platforms to make money, such as Facebook, for example. And has not been replaced by any other dominant economic mode of functioning growth. So much so that it probably will not be transformed until we carry on further in this madness of burning oil and gas without remit. Of course, the reasons for this continued economic dominance are manifold, and the analysis of the global political and elite-based conspiracy, of which George H.W. Bush was certainly a figure, have been extensively analysed elsewhere as kind of conspiracy theory stuff. The point here is to orchestrate a new image of thought that avoids the mistakes of this plateau, this 1992, helps to negate fossil fuel capitalism and leads us down a different path than the one dominated by the collective CO2 release into the atmosphere. This must be a collective activity. It's not a personal thought process. And in What is Philosophy, they give us a clue to what this thought process could be. It says, they say, to think is to experiment. This is a translation modified by Ronald Bogue, so it's hopefully a little bit better. To think is to experiment, but experimentation is always that which is in the process of coming about, the new, the remarkable, the interesting. The new, the interesting are the actual. The actual is not what we are, but rather what we become, what we are in the process of becoming. That's to say, the other are becoming other. So to think in the Anthropocene, is therefore in trying to enact this non-carbon future as a type of experimentation. We don't exactly know how it's going to work, how it will clash with what is existing now. thinking is not just a personal subjective choice dependent on consciousness, because the unity of the thinking subject, questioned through these processes, redoubles and changes even as we do them. Deleuze was insistent that his approach lends itself to metaphysics, and it is, as a secular thinking practice, this metaphysics draws and adds to this analysis of the Anthropocene. This is my tables in this, as a thinking practice. So thought still happens. It's just not contained or controlled in a human-only mode of consciousness raising or simple emancipation. In other words, Deleuze's differential ontology works through stripping away thought until we're left closer to what is real, for example, as exemplified, hopefully, in this construction of the plateau of June the 13th, 1992, and the everyday life in Dallas under fossil fuel capitalism. The ontology, thinking of the virtual, the intensive, and the actual, from difference of repetition, give us these different registers, these different ways around a basic thought, which is that there are intensive morphogenic processes following differential and virtual multiplicities to both localize and individual substances with extensive properties and differentiated qualities. Sorry, it's kind of hard. Just wrote that sentence, thought, God, that's a hard sentence. So, simply put, according to Deleuze, and to avoid these dualisms, nature, culture, for example, an intermingled ecology and nature as objective knowledge is charting the virtual to things. That's understanding and mapping a production of things of and in the world, which proceeds by way of intensive processes and latterly was called cartography by Guattari. In this way, we can see how these three through lines for thinking, the virtual, the intensive, and the actual, may come together. We can't escape the Anthropocene. These are material processes in the earth, even on, and fully involved in evolution, even negative aspects such as pollution, CO2 release, extinction events, and possible demise of us because of this. What we can do in a fuller picture from Deleuze's ontology is come to this virtual field as being composed of ideas, multiplicities, differential elements, relations, singularities. I would say they're they're linked rates of change. Other words, thought in the Anthropocene is like a time bomb. We're counting down, but yet within that countdown, there's all these complex, interesting things we can do. Hopefully, putting Deleuze Guattari to work. Okay. Conclusion. So it's thinking about all of these aspects, is the thinking prospects in the Anthropocene, the negative and difficult ways in which changing politics seems to be so intractable, so immovable, can lead us to kind of despair. And the philosopher poet Ian Shukkoran, Romanian, he expressed it in this way: those who know what it means to be man long to be anything but. If I could, I would choose every day another form, plant, animal. I'll be all the flowers one by one. Let me live the life of every species, wildly, unself-consciously. Let me try out the entire spectrum of nature. Let me change gracefully, discreetly, as if it were the most natural procedure. How I would search the nests and caves, wander the deserted mountains, the sea, the hills, the plains. Only a cosmic adventure of this kind, a series of metamorphoses, could awaken in me the desire to become man again. If the difference between man and the animal lies in the fact that the animal can only be an animal, whereas man can also be not man, that is something other than himself, then I am not man. So it's kind of, thinking around these questions of agency, what it is to be human in this difficult situation, such as the Anthropocene, can lead us to this kind of quite negative, nihilistic conclusions about changing the situation. That is one through line of the Deleuze-Guattari thinking approach. It's not the only one. It's not necessary. You don't have to end up there. But, it's definitely a and as the last quote I put in here is from Nietzsche, which kind of backs it up. From this perspective, even the most extreme moral phenomena, the ascetic priest, remains a manifestation of an immanently conceived will, albeit a will to nothingness. As Nietzsche insists, man still prefers to will nothing than not will. So, it's not an easy conclusion. There are there are options. Options can be easily taken by capitalism and used and exploited for profit and whatever reason. So you have to be very careful. Being too optimistic, too gung-ho about the situation is dangerous. But I would say, at least Deleuze Guattari do give us that possibility, even if it, may well be negative. All right. How'd I go for time? You write these things, then immediately think, oh, what the hell have I written?
It's question time.
David.
Hi, George.
I was just a little bit confused about the way you have used synthesis, connective, disjunctive, and conjunctive.
Right.
I think you have got multiple schemata about that.
Right.
I mean, virtual is like something here, I think you are shuffling it up a lot. That's what I feel.
Yes.
And one important point, you're saying that conjunctive synthesis, actually surplus value is something connected with conjunctive synthesis. That is commodities and all other things put together. So if I understand about these three syntheses which he is speaking, Deleuze and Guattari is speaking, the connective synthesis, they very clearly say it is if so, and the conjunctive is and disjunctive is either or, and of course there is very clearly there are a lot of problems there. So connective synthesis, one of the very beautiful example he gave is about production, labor and production. It's all connected: labor, machine, factory, and naturally there will be a surplus value so that the capital recycles back. And very clear example of what is a connective synthesis. And the conjunctive is of course definitely more problematic, and disjunctive is something again. But you somewhere put the conjunctive synthesis where surplus value is produced. I mean, surplus value can be in the connective synthesis also. So what makes you say that? Surplus value is something to do with connective, conjunctive synthesis, because there is I think there is a logical problem there. Either we should claim that there is no surplus value in connective synthesis, or, surplus is only in conjunctive. So what do you mean by that? Yeah.
No, I think, no, you're right. I simplified. I tried to come up with a bit of a representational metaphysics using these concepts. Of course, they all do intermingle and join in with each other. That's the whole Deleuzean point. But I think you can read Anti-Oedipus in quite a simple way, that you go from this kind of connective state where you're in nature, with immanence in a kind of shamanistic kind of society, to disjunctive where the kings get involved and there's a class system and power, and then the conjunctive where, surplus for capitalism comes in and joins decoded flows. But of course, connective synthesis still happens in a capitalist society. Of course it does. People join together in trade unions, people can have collective action. There is still, so it's not as simple as that. But in terms of having a story which kind of helped us, I think, to understand the Anthropocene, that's what I was trying to do. I was actually reading Michael Hart's work on this. I think he simplifies it, and I kind of bought that story a little bit. It's not totally true. You're right. Anne? Oh, another question. Yep.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah. Hello, sir. I'm Shayanti.
Hi. Could you just speak up a bit? Sorry, yeah?
Hello?
Toxic discourse, did you say?
Yeah, toxic discourse.
Yeah.
So it's very important with regard to both economy and growth. So I was trying to understand how would we understand the concept of toxicity in a larger schema of Deleuzian and Guattarian studies.
Yep. This is a really good question. CO2 is pollution. But according to George Bush at the time, it wasn't. So in a way, it's been redesignated as CO2, as through the Anthropocene, through the understanding. So I think what Deleuze, Guattari give you a reading of that malleability of concepts. The things now that we might think are quite innocent, and in the future, could we have plastics, for example? Plastics are a really good example. So useful, you can do anything with plastics, but I read this piece called Traffic Jams a few years ago, 2011, and in here I talk about the North Pacific Gaia. So there is actually, some people have estimated a swirling mass of plastics in the Pacific Ocean the size of North America. So plastics are extremely destructive. So it's, this is a question of multiplicity. A working metaphysics from Deleuze-Guattari, it's not just saying everything's multiple, so within a discourse there are other discourses, but it's, what can we do about them? In terms of environmentalism, so what? So it's a through line that can actually become really destructive, like this Anthropocene, like man-made ingenuity in the past, building roads, cars, it's now destroying the world. So I think I would say kind of material analysis of these situations gives you these possible ways to refigure, recalibrate, re-understand, and hopefully take collective action. Yes?
As you propose the real answer to
Yes?
the problem of contemporary environmentalism is man to become to be ready to live multiple livings of plants, animals.
Yes?
And taking partly human being is animal and plant, all is related to the entire cosmos. But this kind of multiple becomings is possible in the case of probably for tribals and aboriginals. And the problem with the modern man is he is fully anthropocentric and human. And how this transformation can be possible or brought about in real life. This is taking place in the thinking level, that is what we are discussing. But this urbanized human being, this transformation is how it can be brought about. This is a problem.
I agree. I do agree. Deleuze-Guattari don't give you this easy. There's not an easy. This is like the end. This is why the ending of this paper was really hard. I didn't have a utopian, we're all going to change, we're all going to become ecological warriors and, all live happily ever after. It's, look who's president of the United States at the moment. It's not ecologically very, our leadership isn't helping us. And so in a way, I kind of thinking about Antonio Negri, some of his political comments in this area. So as I was reading it, because I didn't actually include Negri in the paper, but whether or not is sort of the idea of the multitudes and some sense that the ecological crisis will provide a collective reason at last to act. And whether if Deleuze-Guattari help in that process, then great. I'm happy. But whether it will or not, I don't know. I haven't got a crystal ball.
Yeah, thank you for your very interesting presentation. I was just thinking, I understand a number of other applications of Deleuzian ideas in understanding ecology. I think Mackenzie Walk's molecular red is perhaps one of the best applications, and question number one is, where do you situate your work? I mean, are you one of those people who say that we have already touched the molecular line, read, and I know a lot has to be done by way of activism. And there is Zizek's position again on ecology is something that we don't really need to worry too much about. So you started by talking about the importance of activism, and I think my friend here, Ebikoshi, was talking about the same thing. You did begin with Bush, right?
Yes.
But you have the Trump event of trumping the Paris Agreement. Yeah. So how do you see this? Don't you see that this whole discourse about ecology or this environmental protection is even produced and discarded by America? I mean, at their will, right? And is this taken into account at all? Because how could you actually begin by talking about or by quoting Bush and his, as you said, rhetorical announcement, and not talking about what America, what America's take right now on the question is? And this is one thing. I mean, question.
There's a follow-up
I find the thing is,
it's a serious
on the one
point.
hand, you're right. I understand that you look at the other dimensions of the question, where you say that the Dallas is an example, right?
Yes.
But what is your take on how America is actually looking at the same question right now? I mean, not just in the way it's practiced or, in terms of activism in the States, but at the governmental level, at the policy level, right? There's been a tremendous shift there. And then finally, one last question. These are all ultimately theories and questions. How do you really? I'm thinking of Guattari's work, Three Ecologies.
Yes.
Where he talks about the three ecologies as being individual subjectivity, society, and the environment. How do you actually put these things into practice so that it has some kind of effect on climate damage?
No, thank you for that question. I think I was thinking exactly the same as I was writing and as I'm now, trying to theorize this. I suppose my image of environmental activism or environmental politics being a small, marginalized part of politics, small party. I don't know what it's like in India, it is in Australia. As far as I can understand, it's like that in America. The Green Party has not got a lot of influence. I agree with the Guattari. That should be before politics. That should be the whole of politics. Should be, as any consideration of economics should take into consideration the environment. But I don't see the current. It would be an interesting second paper to follow up the Trump quotes rather than Bush. One of his first things he did, I think, when he came into office was shut down the ETA. I think that's right. So, that gives out a clear message that the environment's not on the agenda. It's all economics. So again, in the end, I kind of came to almost like, without realizing, when I write, it's just, my practice of writing is I just put all these things together. And I did come to like a negative thing at the end, maybe because I was in the state of looking at the current situation and the future and how to change these things. So, as I say, Deleuze, Guattari don't give us they don't give us a simple solution to this. I think, in Anti-Oedipus, there is more of that revolutionary zeal that they can change things. But, watch this space. Maybe Anne's got an interesting take on this.
I have questions.
Okay.
We will be shortly winding up, and therefore.
All right, and maybe Anne's just a quick question.
Okay. I'm a little bit skeptical about the possibility to take syntheses that are dispersed in various books over 20 years and putting them together like this. I mean, it's very interesting, But then you have here the three syntheses of anti-Oedipus, and then you mix them with the three syntheses of difference and repetition. This is interesting. But then you might be putting together things that shall remain separated, because the whole idea of synthesis may seems in a pedagogical way to be very practical to memorize, but then even in the first difference and repetition, Deleuze tries to understand times, and then he comes up with what he calls three syntheses. But then in Anti-Oedipus, the question is completely different. It is the question of production of human societies in history. So really, the problematic have moved to something that is not unconnected, but then you have to re-enact the relationship between the two moments. And I'm not sure that you are going to find square angles and right passages, right? Because you have to take the possibility for one or two thoughts or a match of thoughts to have a pattern of change, and not only look at the 1, 2, 3 of the first beginning in 68. And so I would be quite, I think it's very much interesting, but then I would be not so as confident as you are in trying to squeeze everything in something that is that makes sense in an operation, trying to undo something in French metaphysics whatsoever in 68. But then the situation in the 80s, and then when Guattari wrote the three ecologies in 90, so it's change. There is a change. So I'm a bit confused about the first time, because I believe that ecology involves space and time, and this old separation between time and everything else has profound roots into Western metaphysics since Descartes, but not so much into Deleuze and philosophy's thought, where we deal with Einsteinian space and time. Because if you maintain the supremacy of time, then you will have ecological problems with Earth. Being not only time, but also space, because we had time and Earth. This was yesterday, right? But not today. We have to come up with something that is not only time and not only economy. And ecology, such as Guattari does puts it in the three ecology, he says ecology is not nature. It is not the nature, the ancient nature. Ecology is always mental, social, and environmental. So ecology does not imply only the tree, and this tree, it is not natural. It has been planted by somebody. So
I agree. You know, I got a little bit carried away with the tables. It just seemed, you know, yeah. I think the serious point is that, which I don't think Deleuze, Guattari, if they were still alive, would disagree with, is that in the time of the Anthropocene, which is time, we need to come up with a new metaphysics. Whether this is useful or not, I don't know. I'm just putting it out there as a possibility. The space aspect I tried to deal with in terms of the dynamics of the actual Dallas and the case study. Whether it works or not is, you know, this is, again, up to the audience, you know. Is it useful? Metaphysics should be useful. It should be practical. It should be, I think, helpful for you in your life to do something. It's not just about, as you said beautifully the other day, just a couple of people theologically with the books who've got the secret of metaphysics and nobody else can understand it. Again, you know, and it should be experimental as well. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes it just, we don't quite get the tone, it's too hard, it's too simplified, you know. So, but I always, I think, I hope, try and come up with something new and something which is adapted to a specific question such as the Anthropocene.
Thank you, Professor Cole.
Good or not, I don't know. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, finish. No, finish. You're finished?
Yeah, I finished it.
Thank you.
We could talk on that.
Thank you for the questions and the clarifications provided by Professor Cole. Now, may I request Professor Kenneth Sorin, Duke University, United States, to take over and his lecture on overview of Anti-Oedipus.
I had a question. Maybe I'll ask you later. Somehow I have a problem. Maybe I think problem with this very thought of we are damaging nature, this concept, because I feel this is I want to be corrected if I am wrong, but this is always the back of my mind, and I believe it is anthropocene mode of thinking.
Yeah, but
we are taking back the episode. Yeah. Saying that we are damaging.
I don't know if I can.
What nature?
Can I control this using my own device? So if I put it,
Actually, it's always what we see is all my so then actually I see
let me. Oh, where is it?
love when he holds his laptop in his hand, feel like he's holding iPad. It's the size and I know.